Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Russell Martin.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. If you're a first-time listener or a long-time supporter, we're glad that you are here. If you're new to our community, we invite you to follow our website, studentministryconversations.org, and we have all of our past episodes, show notes, blog articles, and also follow us on Talk Student Men, at Talk Student Men, wherever you hang out on socials. So we are here to inspire and equip you and encourage you in your role as a student pastor. And hopefully the things that you hear on this podcast and all of our podcasts equip and encourage you to be a better youth leader as we continue to grow. So today we are excited to have Brooke Robertson join us on the podcast, and she is a talented singer-songwriter who I've heard in person myself. And Brooke brings a unique perspective to the table as she shares her story of trauma, reconciliation, and forgiveness. And I know that her insights and personal experiences will inspire us and challenge us as we continue to live out faith in tangible ways, and as we talk to and hang out with students. So sit back and relax and get ready to learn from one of the best. I'm honored to have Brooke Robertson today, and I can't wait to dive into this conversation. So first off, Brooke, first of all, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm looking forward to this. Why don't you just start off? Some people may know you, a lot of people may not. And so kind of, who are you? How did you get to where you are now? Why are you sitting on a porch with chickens and a tractor in the background? And what's your story?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town in Southeast Louisiana and still live here now. I've got great aunts and uncles and grandmas and all the family around me. We call it Robertson Hill. It is not a hill. Okay. We flood when it rains hard. So I don't know where that term came from, but it was so sweet growing up. You'd be able to go run over to grandma's house. And it's just, we're a very tight knit family. And so I'm very thankful for that, but haven't moved yet. I feel like if the Lord wants me to move, I will have that peace to do that. But for now, I just travel all over, and Louisiana is my base when I come home. But how I got where I am as far as musically, so my dad is very, very musically inclined, talented with drums, guitar, piano. He can even sing. He doesn't sing often, but he can sing. And I grew up hearing him around the house just playing, and I was always just very intrigued by it, and I'd always just listen and in the background in the distance. And I started singing. So it was one fifth Sunday, so we call it down here, where everyone comes together the last Sunday of the month and share their talent with the church, whether it's singing, dancing, instruments, whatever that looks like. And so I actually sang Grace Flows Down. If you haven't heard that song, it is a beautiful song. I sang that song, and that's kind of where it all started. I was on the youth band, so I started really singing in front of people. And then I kind of grew up a little bit and started with the grown-ups. We call it big church. And so I was actually doing the slides, upstairs, clicking the slides. And then I ended up singing on the worship team when I was probably 12 or 13 when I started singing in front of people, and super quiet. Didn't want anyone to hear me. I always would hold the microphone by my throat, and person working sound like, Brooke, can you please put the microphone by your mouth? But yeah, I was so shy though. I didn't want anyone to hear me. And I kind of look back now, I was so intimidated and didn't even feel like I had a voice. And that will make sense later on when I share my story. But God was showing me that I did have a voice. And it's kind of cool to think back about that. But so years and years pass on, and I started leading songs, probably later teen years. And I had some friends in my early 20s start coming to my church, and they were really involved with music. One was seeking it professionally. The other one was helping him do that. And so they approached me about it. Hey, you want to just start recording some stuff in my home studio? Covers. We'll just do covers. and just upload them, like, just for fun. And I was so hesitant at first. It's like, there's no way I'm going to do that. I'm perfectly fine with where I'm at. But um, he didn't beg me, but I just felt like maybe I should just try. It sounds kind of like fun. So we started doing that, and I uploaded some covers on Facebook. And my manager now actually found them on Facebook and reached out and was like, hey, you should come up and write. Well, that was 2016. I was right there about to graduate college, and I had all the things figured out in my head of what I was supposed to do. I graduated in kinesiology. I was going to go to graduate school and get my master's in occupational therapy because I wanted to help people. I knew that's what I wanted to do. Hindsight again, I am helping people. It's just not what I thought. But God knew that. And so he shut those doors, and I could not get into graduate schools at all. I couldn't pass the test that I needed to pass. And I was praying a very selfish prayer of like, God, you're a miracle worker. You can help me get into the school despite the test scores. Like, you could do it. You've done it for other people. Well, he didn't. And I just felt so disappointed. But throughout that time, like, music kind of helped get me through, and it gave me like this purpose to like, just this purpose and this deep desire, I guess, that I didn't even realize, but God knew it, and he was birthing that in me. And so we were uploading that consistently, and I was like, this school thing ain't working out. Let me just try. Let me just go up to Nashville. It didn't make sense at the time. I didn't have a plan B though. Like, I had no idea what I was supposed to do because school didn't work out. So I was like, you don't know until you just try, right? It could just be a closed door, but what if it's an open door? I don't want to like miss out just because of fear, holding me back. And so I went up to Nashville in 2017, and that's when the whole music thing rolled out. And I can go even deeper, but I don't want to jump ahead. But yeah, that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah. And before we started recording, we talked about church camp, and you kind of mentioned how that was kind of how you came to faith. And since we are talking with youth leaders and stuff, can you talk just a little bit about that? I know it wasn't one of our original questions, but kind of how even camps and stuff like that, and kind of how you were when you were growing up in your youth group and stuff.
Yeah, so youth group was really, really tight. My cousin actually led the youth group, but it was just this tight community, and we would go to church camp every single summer. And church camp is where I got saved, where they did an altar call, and I felt the presence of God like I had never felt before. And I felt conviction of things that maybe I had said or done to people that I didn't realize were hurtful until I got saved. It was like this holy conviction of like old to new. Like, I felt that immediately. It was a very wild experience. And I was probably 11 or 12 whenever I got saved. And I can remember that feeling like it was yesterday. I can remember where I was standing in that auditorium in Jackson, Mississippi, where we had all of our youth church camps. And I don't know, it's just one of those things where it left a huge impression on my life. Even the counselors that were there during that time left a huge impression on me. And so I love church camp. I'd even love to go back and be a counselor, like to be that person that someone was for me. I would love that.
And you talked about the fact that was about the time you started singing and stuff too. So there's probably something with that. So I've heard a little bit about your story. You came to our church and you sang and did a wonderful job for our youth, and we were so glad to have you out here. But you do have a big story, and you do have a story that has just kind of encompasses your life and that you share anywhere you go. So I'm just going to give you some time just to kind of share that. I mean, you talk about forgiveness and redemption. And so, why are those such big themes? And just, I'm just going to give you some time to share what you share.
Of course. You always hear, you should always forgive. You should always forgive. And I've always heard that growing up, and like, you never really know or realize how much unforgiveness holds you back and keeps you bitter until you're having to walk through that. But the Bible is very clear about forgiveness and tells us that we have to forgive to be forgiven. It's one of those things that's easier said than done. And I'll kind of go into depth about my testimony, but I always promised myself that I was okay. Like, growing up, I always said I was okay and I didn't need to share my story with anybody, that I was just going to handle it on my own. And I always promised myself I'd go to the grave with it. Like I had made a promise to myself that I wasn't going to tell anybody. And God had other plans through music, because he knew that I would have never shared my story if it wasn't for music. And that's why he opened those doors and he closed those doors, because he just knew. He knew before I even knew. But I was sexually abused at 10 years old, and I went through so many emotions. How do you really process something to that extent as a little kid? How do you process those emotions? How do you figure out anything, with your emotions? Because you're learning life alone, much less this wrench was just thrown in it. And so I went through a lot of shame, and I blamed myself. I asked, what could I have done differently? Should I tell anybody or should I not tell anybody? What do I do? I don't want anyone to blame me for it. All the things that kind of go through your head. And it left me feeling just very shameful and dirty and alone and scared. And as a kid, for me, it was safer just to bury it deep down and not tell anybody, because I didn't want to have to face any of that. So I would just bury it deep down and almost became numb to it. There were times where I feel like the Lord was just protecting me, but I was really numb as well, where I'd almost forget about it. And then this memory would surface over time, make me feel all these feelings again. And then I would just bury it underneath the rug again, and never really handling it, never really letting the Lord heal those places. And throughout that time, I can pinpoint 2 pastors' wives that had shared their story in a congregation where I was sitting in, and they were very bold about the stories. And I remember this one pastor sharing her story that was very similar to mine, and I remember just saying to myself, how can she be so brave? How can she be so bold about sharing her story, when the thought in that moment just made me feel very uneasy? And like, I know now it's because I wasn't healed, but I didn't know how to get there. I didn't know how to get where she was. And I was like, but it did plant a seed that it was possible. I just didn't know how to get there. And so it was something that I always thought about throughout that time of just silence and not having a voice, I felt like. And I found my place as a Christian artist. So fast forward, I'm now a Christian artist, and I'm writing songs. And I was right off of tour in 2018 with Seventh Day Slumber. And it was just like this ultimate high. I was like, man, this is so awesome. I just got off this tour, the tour bus life, all the things. And then it ended, and I just felt like I hit a wall. I felt like, am I even supposed to be here? Like, there's so many people that can sing better than me, play guitar better than me. Why does God have me in the industry? Like that, like almost guilt, or like the sense of I didn't know what my purpose was. But God was going to show me that. And so I was like, God, if you really want me here, please just show me what this looks like. What are songs that people need to hear? What does this ministry look like? Is this even where I'm supposed to be? And I just began to just really seek the Lord's heart out for that. And this story surfaced when I was praying about songs to write about. And I fought God. I said, I've been okay for this long. There's no way that I can share this with the world. And that wasn't even what I was most afraid about. I was afraid of telling my parents and my family, the people that were really close to me, that I hid for so long. And I fought God naturally for 2 weeks. I fought God, and it was something that just would not leave me. Like before, it would, I'd bury it underneath the rug and forget about it for a while, and it'd come back. But this time, like, it was 2 weeks of just constant thought in my head that I needed to write a song about it. And so I knew that there were some things that I hadn't done that I needed to do. And for me personally, I knew that it was going to take for me to vocalize forgiveness to this person, to be able to go and do this, to go write this song. And so I reached out to my abuser, and I told him, I said, I just want you to know this is where I'm at in life, and I've got to write a song about what happened, but I just want you to know that I forgive you, and that God loves you, and he'll forgive you if that's what you want, you want to give your life to him, he will forgive you for the things that you've gone through. And I was able to share Jesus with someone who hurt me very deeply. And I know that that was what God had planned years and years ago as a 10-year-old girl. And I was going to have to walk through this and process healing and learn a lot of things through people. But that was a moment where I found my freedom, was being able to forgive this person that hurt me. And I was able to go up and write this song called Taking My Voice Back and just a slap into the enemy's face, of like, I've got a voice that God gave me. I'm not going to let you keep me quiet anymore. I'm not going to let you make me feel like I'm shameful anymore because I'm free because of Jesus. I can walk in freedom because I've given it all to him and that I forgive. And I've had people, ask me, Brooke, how can you forgive someone who's hurt you so deeply? And I always tell them, forgiveness does not excuse the wrong done, but it allows you to walk in the freedom that God's given you and to walk in the purpose that he's given you. Because you don't realize how much unforgiveness suppresses you and can distract you and keep you bitter and angry and all those things. But when you forgive, it's so freeing there. And I experienced it myself, and it is easier said than done, but it's so worth it. It is just so worth it. And I always share this at every show because I remember there was this one summer where I had to speak to a youth event, and I was just kind of prepping for it. And I was like, Lord, what do you want me to say to these kids? How do I explain forgiveness to them? Because it is hard. And he gave me this picture of him on a cross. Jesus was on the cross and he's being beaten to death by his own people. And he looks down, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. So just picture him on the cross and he's forgiving the people that are killing him. And I'm like, Jesus forgave the hardest thing that we would ever have to endure on this earth. He forgave them. So can I. I can forgive as well. And it's so freeing there. And I want anyone listening to know that they're not alone, to find somebody close to them that they trust, be able to just talk it out with them, to hold them accountable, to guide them in a biblical way, and to just listen. I think that's the most important thing, is just to sit down and just listen. Because I think sometimes people don't want to talk about the abuse that they had gone through because they're afraid of what someone else is going to say or interject or their opinions. But when we just keep it biblical, there's something about that where it just takes a weight off of the person who's been abused. It's like a relief of, oh, you're not judging me, you're just listening and you're wanting to pray for me and be there for me. And my family, obviously, when I told them, they loved me, all those fears that I had. It was just irrational fears. But I know some people do struggle with that. And maybe some people have had people judge them for it. But I think it's important to find people that are walking with the Lord, and able to guide you in a biblical way. Like as if you were sitting down with Jesus himself. And what would he say to you? He would love you. He would love you through it. And so after I wrote this song, it was probably a 6-month span before I told anybody. I was just praying, God, please guide me in how I'm supposed to approach my family about this. How do I even bring up something like this? It's not anything small, And I went around and told all my family. The hardest person was my dad, very protective. My dad is very protective. And I remember the night before I was telling my dad I had anxiety about it because I didn't want him to ask certain questions. I was trying to figure out what can I say to avoid questions, all the things. I had this big old note typed out on my phone of what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. And I just felt the Lord say, delete the note, delete it, and let me walk into this conversation first, and I will handle the rest. And he did. This conversation obviously was very emotional. But my dad gave me a big hug. And later on that day, he said, Brooke, if you can forgive this person that abused you, then so can I. And I was like, whoa, God, what are you doing? You're showing me just a small little glimpse of what you're going to do through this story. And I went around and I remember telling my grandmother she was abused by her father. And I had never known. And she shared that with me when I told her my story. And she told me that she was struggling with unforgiveness. And just a couple weeks ago, I was able to have a deep conversation with her about what forgiveness really looks like, because she's been holding that in for years. Her dad's been passed for a really long time. And I'm like, God's using her granddaughter. What a beautiful thing. And I just see the Lord moving in her life in so many ways. And just on a bigger, even a bigger scale, just traveling all over the US and being able to hear people tell their stories. That's my why. That's my purpose. Those questions that I asked back in 2018 of why I was supposed to be here, that's why. To be able to share my testimony with anyone who's hurting, who's gone through trauma or abuse or just unforgiveness in general. He's really showed me my purpose in that. And I constantly get messages in on, thank you for writing this song. I really needed it. It showed me that I needed to forgive the person who abused me. I'm like, this is what keeps me going right here. And it's the little things like that. The Lord just reminds me of, you're right where I need you. You're going to struggle with spiritual warfare. You're going to struggle with not wanting to tell your story. I remember a few months, it may have been like a month or two before the record release, my abuser reached back out and didn't want to call it abuse. And those feelings came back, and it's like the Lord's like, I knew this was going to happen. That's why this is already in the works to be released to the world, because I knew this was going to happen. There was no turning back. And I'm so glad that I didn't believe the enemy in that moment. And he was just trying to keep me quiet still, because he knew the impact that it was going to have. And I've seen, even since releasing this, how much the enemy has tried to attack. The record released in March of 2020, the same month the whole world shut down. And there was just a lot of things. But there's also a lot of things that God showed me throughout that it's not about writing a song. It's not just about singing a song. It's about the ministry behind it and the heart behind it and the freedom that it's going to bring his children. And gosh, it's been so worth it. What a journey it's been. And I've just been blessed to be able to just be a vessel, a small part in what he's doing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I know you shared it before and you told the story multiple times, but for the new group and to share something that kind of maybe will give other people courage to share things that they've held back. For me, music is a way that I process things, and that I will sit down and play piano and write some stuff too. So just overall, how has music helped you to process what you went through? And then also how you share your story. If you have anything else to add on it, you talked a little bit about it previously, but what else, how else has music helped you, or does it help you to process even, every day, or things you continue to deal with?
Yeah, honestly, every song that I write has a story behind it. And, like I had mentioned, if it wasn't for music, I would have never shared my story. And God knew that. So I had to go up and share this story for the first time with my manager and the songwriter that was helping me write this song. And it's almost like I had to relive it. And I had to go through all the details, not all the details, but a lot of details that were uncomfortable to talk about. But it's like ripping a Band-Aid off, right? Like, I had covered a wound for so long and I hadn't let God heal it. But talking about it, going through what I had gone through, like processing that in my head and actually having to verbalize it out loud for the first time in my life was healing for me. Because it was almost like I had exposed a wound, but in a way that God was going to heal it the way it originally needed to heal. And I was letting him into those places of, hey, this doesn't feel good, but God, please just show me what this healing looks like. And it was forgiveness that I needed to really heal on. But I mean, even throughout these past 3 years of writing songs, every song that I've written so far has a story. My aunt just passed away, who was just such a spiritual warrior and rock in my life. She was a spiritual mama for me. And grief has been really rough. But I was able to write a song about her this past trip, and it makes me smile, because it's just, to think of her in a a good way instead of how she was sick or all those things. Like she's in her spiritual body now, she's healed and healthy and whole. But it just helps process and heal, when I'm able to kind of vocalize it and say it out loud. And I think that's why personally I had to call my abuser, because I needed to vocalize that. Not everyone heals that way. So people, it's just between you and God. That's all it takes. But for me, I for some reason have to vocalize things, and singing does that for me. It helps. So
your EP is called Have My Heart. That's the one you have currently out right now.
mm-hmm.
And just in general, because I know I did youth ministry and I did some songwriting and stuff. And I know there's other, it seems to be a common thing. There's a lot of youth leaders who also lead worship and do stuff. What's your process for writing? One, specifically that, but also just in general, kind of what's your process for thinking and writing, and kind of give us a little bit of behind the mind of Brooke and how do you write those songs? And, do you do, the age old question is, do you do music first or words first or chords, or just share anything that would maybe help somebody else who's doing the same thing?
Yeah. So Have My Heart was a learning curve for me. I released that in 2018. We wrote it in 2017. And I had never written prior to this. Just a little FYI. I did not have any experience behind writing. I had no idea. And so when I went up to write, I was almost just letting the songwriters, like I would share things that were on my heart. Like I had just kind of gone through a breakup and just trying to figure out, like, trusting God, like trying to figure all the things out, because I hadn't gotten into schools. So that was kind of the stories I was sharing at the time to these songwriters. And so for those writes, honestly, I can't really remember. I want to say that some of these songwriters already had like melody ideas, and we would just put lyrics together. I think one songwriter had like half a song already written. So that one, it was a learning curve for me to kind of see how writing even happens, to watch these professional songwriters do their thing. But I was able to share the stories behind these as well. 2020, though, we wrote this record starting 2018 through 2019. It was a year and a half songwriting process for the record that I put out in 2020 called Taking My Voice Back. Got 11 songs on it. And every one of those songs is based off of a life experience that I had gone through. Like Taking My Voice Back is the abuse that I'd gone through. I wrote a song about my mom called Purpose for the Pain, things that she had gone through when she was pregnant with me. And I wrote a song called See You Here, which is very different, but it's about my great grandmother who lives right across the field that I'm looking at her house. She's gone to be with Jesus, but just like little things like that. But as far as those songwritings go, like it's so different. I remember having several melody and lyric ideas to present to these songwriters with that record. And that's kind of how it looks like. I like to have the story, a solid story or experience that I'd gone through, and some lyrics. And I love writing detailed lyrics, not really stuff that you hear on radio, but it's just what I gravitate towards. I grew up listening to like 90s, 2000s country music, the storytelling side of things. And so that's kind of what I gravitate towards, like all the details in the world. I have a song called Wait and See, and it's talking about basically if I could go back and talk to little Brooke. And so like there's a line that says, I see you standing there with blue eyes and long blonde hair. Like that's just how I write. I love writing things that you feel like you're there, And so, but it looks different. This last writing session, I basically had lyrics and melodies to present to these songwriters, and they just helped me finish it, So
that seems to be the progression you talked about. Like you went in and I experienced, it was weird for me. I went in and I had some lyrics and things like this, and you was like, no, that, okay, we can work with that. And
yes,
I was thinking, hey, I'm gonna go. I've written songs before, and we're just gonna go and record them, and that wasn't the process.
No.
But it seems that what you've talked about is you started off the same kind of jolting experience I did, but as you've gone, you've learned kind of the basics and like taking lessons in songwriting. And so now when you go up, you have a better idea of what they're looking for, because they do know what, and that's something for anybody who's doing this. Don't be, disheartened when you go up and you realize that it's not just, here's my song, let's record it, because you can do that anywhere. You're going to them because of that.
And there's this one songwriter, I had a whole song written and we butchered the whole thing when I presented it to the songwriters, but they're like, "Oh, that's a cool line," or that's a cool verse, but what's another way to say it? So like kind of just tweaking things, I guess.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. Or like, hey, I like that line, but what if we change this word instead? It's the part of it. It's fun. I love it. I've learned to love it. At first I was very like nervous and intimidated by these songwriters, but over the years I really learned like what I want my craft to look like and be. And God's really shown me like I got a song called Just Be You. And so I have to remind myself to just be who I am. And some of these songs that I write are not radio friendly. And that's okay to never compromise in your songwriting. It's your art. It's what God's put in you to sing about and write about. It's okay if it doesn't fit a mold. Um, just as long as you love it, that's the most important. And that's what I've learned about songwriting. If you love it, it's all that matters.
Well, you talked about sharing your story and having people write you back or talk to you after concerts, whatever like that. I mean, do you have how have you seen your music like directly impact someone's life? I mean, you talked about your family and telling them the story, but do you have any stories from the road or stories from responses you've gotten back?
So many.
Don't share them all, but
I won't.
Just do you have one that stands out?
I'll share one in particular. I was doing a show last January with Mark Schultz in Indiana. And this one girl came up to me and she said, "Hey, I'd gone through what you've gone through," and that she was struggling with forgiving this person. And I was able to just really pour into her and pray over her. And she messaged me that night and she said, "Hey, on the way home from your show, I told my mom. I had not told anybody, and I told my mom about what happened." And she had said that was just the first step forward in this healing journey. And I'm like, this is what it's all about. Because I feel like when you go through things like this, and I had kept silent for 15 years, I was quiet. Just to tell one person that you trust, that's one step forward in healing right there. It's just saying it out loud to somebody. And so when she said that, I was like, this makes me so happy, to know that you've got somebody that you can talk to now, about this, and that you don't have to struggle with those thoughts in your head. You can just speak them out loud to your mom and tell her how you're feeling in that moment. And so that's one story that really stuck out. But there's so many.
Student ministry podcast. We're talking to student ministry leaders. What are some ways that, and maybe not just like you've dealt with this with writing music, but how does music play a role, and how can youth leaders use music to connect with people, to inspire people, to encourage them, and to maybe deal with some of the things that different types of trauma as they're doing ministry?
Yeah, music's definitely healing, and there's so many songs out there that I'm sure talk about abuse and trauma. I feel like music in general, worship, really showing them what worship looks like, and surrender. That's one thing that my aunt always taught me, is like what surrender really looks like. And that's in our worship. For so long, I felt like I couldn't raise my hand in worship. I felt too shameful, or what people were going to think. But it was in those moments of worship where I realized that's where I found my freedom. That's where I felt like the chains were broken off my life, when I could fully surrender my heart and align my heart with his. Just almost is teaching the younger generation how to really truly surrender, and what that looks like in the Lord, how to walk that out. And then also on the flip side, just being there and talking about it. Some people just don't even want to talk about it. Like a whole sermon can be talked about what forgiveness really looks like from a biblical perspective, but really bringing up the real life problems in life that can cause unforgiveness, like abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, emotional, talking about it. I feel like, oh, we don't want to talk about abuse. It's too dark. It's real. It's so real. And that's one thing I'm thankful for, that in the church specifically is where I learned that you can actually have freedom and you can actually forgive. It was pastors' wives who were talking about it. And it made people uneasy and squirmy in their seats. But the people who had gone through it appreciated it. And it planted seeds in what healing really looked like, and that healing was possible, So So I think that's the most important too, especially coming from like a youth leader, just to be there for your people. I've heard some church hurt stories. You always hear church hurt stories, and this one girl was talking about how they kicked her out, and I can't fathom and can't imagine being kicked out because of your past. I really can't. Um, just loving them like Christ would love, you know? It's almost like back to that childlike saying, what would Jesus do? you know, so anyway, that's kind of my perspective on that.
You say childlike saying, and I remember that in high school. So the difference there.
Yeah.
Um,
High school
but
too, I guess.
yeah, that's all right. So you've shared your story and you've talked about these things. What other advice do you have for youth leaders who, because it is going to come up. It exists right now in every group you're in, and it's just not talked about.
Mhm.
And you talk about the church hurt, and I know there's, we've talked with other people on the podcast before about just, often in church, there's no room for imperfect. There's no room for doubt. There's no room for struggling. It's, it's often some people will suggest something and you will have more faith or pray
Mhm.
more or whatever
Mhm.
like that. So what other advice do you have for student ministry leaders who are may have a student come to them or just ways that they can continue to encourage those who dealt with that?
Yeah, I guess kind of like looking at it as a whole, you look at a church, technically a church is just a building. We are the church, that's what we are. We're the body, we're the church, and then there's just a church house where we go and gather, right? So just going out and even doing things in the community. But anyway, to add to that, I look at church as like a church building, as a hospital. You go to the hospital, you're sick, you know, if you're sick, you're going to go to the hospital. If you got wounds, you're going to go to the hospital, whatever, doctor's office, however you want to call it. I just look at it as when you go to church, that's your place where you should feel the safest, where you should feel the most heard and seen by leaders. And just to be open to sitting down and talking with people, to be intentional and take time to talk to people. I feel like too, we're in such a rush to do this, this, and this. But if there's somebody who you can tell is struggling and hurting, to be intentional with it. Hey, let's go get coffee, or hey, let's go grab lunch or dinner, and just to hear their story and talk to them and let them know that they've got a friend in them and that they can trust them and that they know that they can hold them accountable and to be there for them when they need help, to just be that, Jesus is the great physician. He's the one that we go to when we need healing, but to have that community around us, I think is most important. God gave us that community. He says that we should go and gather. And so to just listen, to be there and listen. Hey, what's going on? What's the thing that you're struggling with the most? And how do you think that we can overcome this together? To just make people know, like, hey, I'm not having to walk this out alone. I trust you. I don't mind sharing my deepest, darkest secrets with you. And I know that you're not going to go tell anybody and that you really, truly care. Like people just who've gone through trauma just want to know that they're not alone and that they can trust you. And I think that's my best advice that I can give.
We do have, I'm kind of wrapping up here. And one of the things on my heart is youth leaders who are starting out, who are just beginning in this. And this is not detailed to, trauma or forgiveness, but just in general, as somebody who travels around and goes to youth leaders and youth groups and things like that, anything you want to tell just directly those youth leaders
Yes.
who are just starting off?
Yeah. There's so many things to say, but really just to come in with humility and to be open to learning and to really learn about what God's idea is and not your idea. I feel like sometimes we come in and we think, oh, we're going to do this, 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 and this to make it good and make it better. But really just be in full surrender with the Lord's heart and what that really is supposed to look like and be in alignment with Him. But to add to that, to find an elder in the church, someone who's walked out life way longer than you, someone who can call you out in love, but to be able to take that criticism back and grow and learn from that is so important to know that, hey, you don't have it all figured out, and that's okay. But I want to learn. I want to know exactly what God wants for this youth group and how I'm supposed to lead and guide them and walk with him. And I feel like elders, they've done it. They've done it all. They've been alive way longer. You can't find better advice than someone like that. And that's one thing that I've searched out for. One of my spiritual mamas beat me to heaven, little turkey. I miss her. But I do have people around me that are older and that are more wiser and just that share their wisdom with me, and I cherish it so much. And even friends, I have friends that are close to my age that aren't afraid to tell you how it is and call you out and pray for you and all the things. And so it's important to find community around you that you can learn from and you can, share what's going on in your life with. It's important to have people to hold you accountable.
It's been awesome talking with you, and
Yeah.
hopefully I'll have you back in person sometime for one of the events we're doing. And I encourage anybody else to. I'm going to have Brooke share kind of her contact information at the end of this. But what's new for Brooke? What's coming up? What's some insight? Anything around the horizon, or just even hopes, or anything for Brooke Robertson music? Anything you want to share with us?
Some exciting things. We have 2 songs that we're almost finished in production with, and I am so excited about these songs and to share them. I don't know exactly when we're sharing them yet. We're still trying to tweak and stuff like that, but we're writing new songs as well. So a lot of new songs in the horizon as far as shows here, there, and everywhere. I'm going to Africa in the end of July, and that's going to be an experience. I believe that God's going to really show a different perspective in my ministry, what that's supposed to look like here. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, just new music on the horizon and shows here and there, whoever wants to have me out. So it's been kind of tough getting shows booked, but it's been a fun journey to just walk this out with the Lord,
Well, so if someone's listening to this, one, I encourage you to go listen to your music. Where do we find your music? How do we get a hold of you? Either to ask more questions about what you've dealt with, because I'm sure you would share that, or if someone has questions about music and doing that, or just to contact you and say, hey, Brooke, we would love for you to come lead worship for a church camp or Disciple Now, or just a living room concert or whatever. So tell us how to get a hold of Brooke.
So I always used to go through all my social medias, but the easiest way is BrookeRobertsonMusic.com. It's BROOKEROBERTSON music.com. And I've got all my social medias there. I've got Spotify, Apple Music, whatever you have, YouTube videos. And then at the very bottom, I've got emails where you can reach out if there's like booking and stuff like that. And I think I have my personal email as well, and I'll answer emails, whether you need prayer, whether it's booking, whether you just want to talk, message me on Instagram, Facebook, whatever that looks like. I'm always checking my messages. So that's where you can find me.
Well, awesome. And again, thank you. And that kind of brings us to an end of another great episode. Hey, if you're listening and continuing to listen, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. And I know that what Brooke has shared on forgiveness and reconciliation and trauma will have an impact on you as a listener, and also what she shared as far as you going and talking to your youth groups and helping them through that. Just before we wrap up, I want to remind you, if you're a regular listener, tell other people about this episode, share on social media, tag your youth pastor friends, and don't forget to tag us at Talk Student Men. Also, if you really like this, leave a review or a comment, and don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so that you get conversations like this one with Brooke in your inbox or to your podcast player or wherever that is every week. One last thing, if you are like Brooke and you would like to be a guest on a show, we believe everybody has a story to share. Everybody has something to tell others. Don't hesitate to reach out social media or our email, which is podcast@studentministryconversations.org. And we are excited to hear from you and welcome new voices in the conversation. So Brooke, again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing, and thank everyone else for tuning in. And we look forward to having you again next time. So
thank you
have
for
a great
having
week.
me. Yeah, you too. Thank you.